prestige. And somewhere above Earth's atmosphere, a silent race had begun. A race of machines, a race of men, a race where the finish line wasn't a place, but a dream. It was a clear night on October 4th, 1957, when the world changed, not with a bang, but with a beep. From a launch site in the barren steppes of Kazakhstan, the Soviet Union sent a small metal sphere into orbit. It was called Sputnik 1, a shiny aluminum ball no larger than a beach ball, weighing just under 200 pounds, with 4 long antennas poking from its sides. It had no camera, no passengers, just a radio transmitter that emitted a steady stream of beeps as it circled Earth every 96 minutes. But those beeps echoed like thunder. To the Soviets, Sputnik was proof of their triumph, the first artificial satellite ever launched by mankind, the first object made by human hands to break free from Earth's gravity. It was a staggering technical achievement. It meant their rockets worked. It meant they were ahead. To the Americans, it was a wake-up call wrapped in polished aluminum. Panic rippled through the United States. If the Soviets could launch a satellite into space, they could launch a nuclear warhead across the ocean. Schools ran duck and cover drills. Headlines screamed of a new red moon. And in living rooms across the country, people looked up and wondered, are they watching us now? Sputnik wasn't just a satellite. It was a signal. It told the world that the USSR had reached space first, and it turned space into a battlefield of prestige, politics, and paranoia. President Eisenhower tried to stay calm, insisting that the US was not falling behind. But behind the scenes, alarm bells rang. Funding for science programs skyrocketed. Congress rushed to create NASA. American schoolchildren were suddenly encouraged to study math and physics, not just to get good jobs, but to defend freedom. Within a month, the Soviets launched Sputnik 2, carrying a passenger. Laika, a stray dog plucked from the streets of Moscow. Laika became the first living creature to orbit the Earth. She would not survive the flight. But the message was clear. The Soviets weren't just ahead. They were accelerating. And now, for the first time, humanity was no longer alone in the stars. We had sent someone up, and the race had truly begun. The shock of Sputnik hit hard. In living rooms and laboratories, classrooms and Capitol Hill, the United States faced a difficult truth. It had been beaten into space. Not by a more powerful nation, but by one that had been, until recently, a devastated wartime ally, now a fierce ideological rival. The question wasn't just, how did they do it? It was, what do we do now? The answer came fast. In 1958, the United States created a new agency, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA. Built from the remnants of earlier aerospace programs, NASA was more than an agency. It was a declaration, a commitment, a promise that America would not only catch up, it would lead. But the first American satellite, Explorer 1, wasn't launched until January 31st, 1958, nearly 4 months after Sputnik. Still, it carried more than a radio beep. It discovered the Van Allen radiation belts, proving that the US wasn't just chasing, it was contributing to science. The space race had become a national mission. Television programs featured space science for children. Schools added rocket math to curriculums. Funding for science, engineering, and math surged. American identity was now linked to the cosmos. But politics, as always, steered the rocket. This wasn't just about curiosity, it was about Cold War dominance. Space was the new high ground. Whoever controlled it would control communications, defense, and prestige. The US feared falling behind in the eyes of the world, especially newly independent nations choosing between capitalist democracy and communist rule. Enter Project Mercury, America's first manned spaceflight program. 7 test pilots, later dubbed the Mercury 7, were selected to represent not just NASA, but the hopes of an entire nation. They trained in secret. They endured punishing physical and psychological tests. and they were turned into heroes before they'd ever left the ground. Meanwhile, the Soviets were preparing to raise the stakes even further, because satellites were only the beginning. The next goal was clear: to send a human into space and bring them home. For America, the challenge was no longer hypothetical. It was real, personal, urgent, and it was only a matter of time before someone, Soviet or American, would risk their life to cross that invisible boundary between Earth and everything beyond it. April 12, 1961. Just after sunrise in the Kazakh desert, a slender silver rocket stood on the launch pad, tall, silent, and poised to change history. Inside it sat a 27-year-old Soviet pilot named Yuri Gagarin. He was calm, smiling even. Clad in an orange flight suit and a white helmet, he looked more like a test pilot than a pioneer. But what he was about to do had never been done: leave Earth entirely. At 9:07 a.m. Moscow time, the Vostok 1 spacecraft roared to life. Gagarin's voice crackled through the radio with a single word that would echo across the planet. Poyakali. Let's go. With that, he became the first human being to enter space. The flight lasted just 108 minutes. Gagarin completed one full orbit around Earth, reaching a peak altitude of 187 miles and travelling over 17,000 miles per hour. He looked down and saw our planet from above, the blue curve of Earth, the blackness of space, and no borders. He later described what he saw with simple wonder. The Earth is blue. How beautiful. It is amazing. But make no mistake, this was not just a moment of human achievement. It was a geopolitical earthquake. The Soviets had done it first. Again. After Sputnik, after Laika, they had now sent a man into space and returned him safely. Gagarin didn't just orbit Earth. He orbited every front page on the planet. The Soviets paraded him like a champion, a symbol of socialist superiority and scientific might. The United States, stunned once more, scrambled to respond. President Kennedy, only a few months into his presidency, now faced the pressure to match and surpass the Soviet triumph. Yuri Gagarin returned to Earth a hero, landing in a field and startling a farmer and her daughter before calmly explaining he had come from space. He never flew in space again, but his name was etched into history. Because on that day, humanity crossed a line we'd only ever imagined. We were no longer earthbound. One man, one orbit, and the space race had officially entered its most human chapter. Just weeks after Yuri Gagarin made history, the United States was reeling, but not defeated. The Soviets had claimed the first victory in human spaceflight, but America had its own plan in motion to match and ultimately surpass the Soviet achievements. America's first step? Alan Shepard. On May 5th, 1961, Shepard, a Navy test pilot, climbed into the Mercury Redstone 3 spacecraft, nicknamed Freedom 7. Shepard's mission wasn't to orbit the Earth. Instead, his was a suborbital flight, a brief but crucial hop into space that would prove the US could send humans into the skies and bring them back alive. The stakes were high. Shepard's flight was only going to last 15 minutes, a brief moment in space. But it was a public declaration. The United States was in the race, and it wasn't about to lose it. The countdown began, and at 9:34 a.m., the rocket launched with a roar that shook the ground. Shepard soared upward, climbing to 116 miles above Earth, entering space for just a few minutes. As he floated weightlessly, he experienced a moment of awe, looking down on the blue planet below him. He didn't have the chance to look long. After a short, thrilling journey, Shepard's flight took a sharp descent and landed in the Atlantic Ocean. Shepard was immediately rescued by a Navy ship, and as he stepped out of his capsule, he was hailed as a hero, the first American in space. Shepard's flight wasn't as impressive in terms of time or distance as Gagarin's orbital mission, but it was a crucial step in the US space program. It proved the Americans could launch men into space, and more importantly, they could bring them back safely. The United States had entered the race, and while it had been a short flight, it was a long leap toward the ultimate goal, the moon. Shepard's success spurred NASA into action. The Mercury program's first success now paved the way for the Gemini and Apollo programs. The US was now determined to go further, to go higher, and above all, to reach the ultimate frontier. The race to the moon wasn't just about rockets anymore. It was about pride, about the human will to reach beyond, and the stakes had never been higher. With Alan Shepard's suborbital flight and the brief but groundbreaking Mercury missions behind them, the United States had proven it could send humans into space. But now, NASA had to answer a bigger question. Could they go further? Could they stay in space longer? And most importantly, could they reach the moon? Enter the Gemini program, the bridge between Mercury and the Apollo missions, the critical testing ground for technologies and techniques that would be required to land a human on the moon. Launched in 1965, the Gemini program was designed to test the limits of human spaceflight. It was bigger, bolder, and more ambitious. The Gemini spacecraft was twice as large as the Mercury capsule and could carry 2 astronauts, making it the first program to push the boundaries of extended space missions. Gemini's first flight, Gemini 3, took place on March 23, 1965, with astronauts Virgil Gus Grissom and John Young aboard. Their mission was brief, a simple orbit of Earth, but it marked a crucial turning point in human space exploration. Grissom's flight lasted just 5 hours, but it proved that 2 men could survive together in space, that they could pilot a spacecraft, and that they could manage critical life support systems in orbit. The Gemini missions began to increase in complexity. Gemini 4 in June 1965 marked the first American spacewalk, with astronaut Ed White floating in the vacuum of space for 23 minutes. This was an enormous step forward, demonstrating that humans could operate outside the confines of their spacecraft, a skill that would be essential for lunar exploration. Gemini also introduced the techniques that would make the Apollo mission possible: orbital rendezvous and docking, which were needed for the lunar mission. The program's ultimate goal was to prepare astronauts to operate in deep space, even if it meant spending days in orbit, performing complex maneuvers and testing the endurance required for longer missions. By the time Gemini 12 completed its final mission in November 1966, the groundwork had been laid. America was ready for the moon. And the Soviet Union, though still ahead in some respects, had little to show for its efforts in comparison. The United States was gearing up for its grandest challenge yet, a challenge that would not just test technology, but human spirit. The race to the moon was heating up, and the finish line was within reach. The year was 1961. President John F. Kennedy, inspired by the growing tension of the Cold War and the challenge of space, made a bold proclamation that would set the stage for one of humanity's greatest feats. On May 25th, he stood before a joint session of Congress and declared that the United States would land a man on the moon by the end of the decade. The stakes were now clear. It was no longer just about sending humans into space. It was about reaching the moon and bringing them back. This vision led to the birth of Apollo, NASA's program designed specifically for lunar exploration. The goal was unprecedented: to send astronauts to the moon, land them safely, and return them to Earth. The Apollo program was America's full-throttle response to the Soviet Union's achievements, an answer to their dominance in the space race. The first step was Apollo 1, a mission tragically marred by a fire on January 27, 1967, that claimed the lives of astronauts Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger B. Chaffee during a pre-launch test. The fire was a devastating setback, but it also spurred an overhaul of NASA's safety protocols and equipment. The Apollo program pressed on, with new determination and innovation, learning from the loss of those brave men. In 1968, Apollo 8 became the first mission to send astronauts into lunar orbit. As the crew, Frank Borman, Jim Lovell, and William Anders, circled the moon, they became the first humans to see the far side of the moon with their own eyes. The sight of Earth rising above the lunar surface from the spacecraft's window was an image that captured the world's imagination and marked a milestone in human exploration. But the ultimate goal still lay ahead. The world watched as NASA prepared for Apollo 11, the mission that would make Kennedy's dream a reality. Tensions between the US and USSR were palpable, but the United States was determined to reach the moon first. On July 20th, 1969, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin made history. As Armstrong descended from the lunar module and stepped onto the surface of the moon, he famously declared, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." The United States had done it. The moon was no longer just a point in the sky. It was a place where humans had stood, a new world conquered. The space race had been won, but humanity's journey beyond Earth was just beginning. On July 20th, 1969, America had done the unthinkable. It had landed a man on the moon. The Apollo 11 mission had fulfilled President Kennedy's promise, and Neil Armstrong's first step onto the lunar surface echoed as both a national victory and a global triumph for humanity. But the space race wasn't over. After the glory of Apollo 11, the question now became, what comes next? For NASA, the immediate task was to complete the Apollo program. With 5 more successful moon landings between 1969 and 1972, astronauts explored different parts of the lunar surface, conducting experiments and collecting rock samples that would offer clues to the moon's history. Each mission reinforced the US position as the undisputed leader in space exploration. But while Apollo was successful, it came at an immense cost, both financially and in terms of human lives. The program had consumed resources and attention, and by the early 1970s, political support for further lunar missions began to wane. The Cold War was still intensifying, but the urgency to outdo the Soviet Union in space was fading. As a result, the Apollo program was abruptly cut short after Apollo 17 in 1972. The immediate focus of space exploration shifted. The Skylab program, launched in 1973, was America's first space station, where astronauts lived and worked for extended periods, conducting experiments in microgravity. Skylab demonstrated the viability of humans living in space for extended periods, laying the groundwork for future space stations and deep space missions. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union, despite its initial successes, began to slow its space efforts. Although it had succeeded in sending the first human into space, the USSR never managed to land on the moon. The race was won, but the Soviets continued with unmanned missions to explore Venus and Mars, and even launched their own space station program, Salyut, which eventually led to Mir, a massive orbital research station that became a symbol of Soviet scientific ambition in space. But it was the Space Shuttle program that would define the next era of space exploration. Launched in 1981, the shuttle was designed to be reusable, allowing for multiple missions with the same spacecraft. The shuttle era promised greater accessibility to space, enabling regular cargo and crew missions to low Earth orbit, and eventually the construction of the International Space Station. Despite the promise of these new frontiers, the early shuttle flights were fraught with challenges, and the tragic loss of Challenger in 1986 reminded the world of the risks involved. But space exploration continued, driven by a shared desire to learn, to grow, and to push the boundaries of what was possible. The era of government space agencies, defined by the space race and Cold War competition, began to give way to a new age, one that increasingly saw the involvement of private companies and international collaboration. The end of the Cold War had shifted the focus away from rivalry, but space exploration remained as captivating as ever. In the 1990s, the International Space Station, ISS, began to take shape in low Earth orbit. Launched in 1998, the ISS represented a groundbreaking collaboration between the United States, Russia, Canada, Japan, and Europe. The station became a symbol of what the world could achieve together, transcending the nationalistic ambitions of the past and placing scientific research above competition. It became humanity's largest and most complex space laboratory, orbiting Earth at a speed of over 17,000 miles per hour, with astronauts from different nations living and working in space for extended periods. While the ISS continues to serve as a hub for international cooperation, scientific research, and technological innovation, it also laid the groundwork for a new direction in space exploration: the privatization of space. Enter SpaceX, founded by entrepreneur Elon Musk in 2002. Musk's vision was clear: to reduce the cost of space travel and make it possible for humans to live on other planets, particularly Mars. SpaceX's success in developing reusable rockets revolutionized space travel. In 2012, SpaceX's Dragon capsule became the first privately built spacecraft to deliver cargo to the ISS. In 2020, SpaceX achieved another milestone when its Crew Dragon spacecraft carried astronauts to the ISS, marking the first time since the Space Shuttle's retirement that American astronauts were launched into space from US soil. SpaceX wasn't the only private player. Companies like Blue Origin, founded by Amazon's Jeff Bezos, and Virgin Galactic, founded by Sir Richard Branson, have also made significant strides in commercial space travel, focusing on suborbital flights for tourists and research. These companies are not just changing the business of space, they're redefining what's possible for private citizens to experience in space. The future of space exploration now includes plans for lunar colonies, Mars missions, and commercial space stations, with companies like SpaceX and Blue Origin developing the necessary infrastructure to make interplanetary travel a reality. In 2021, SpaceX's Starship completed successful test flights, designed for deep space missions. NASA, too, has partnered with private firms to build the Artemis lunar program, which aims to land humans on the Moon once again, with plans for a sustainable presence by the 2020s. Space, once the domain of only the world's greatest superpowers, is now an accessible frontier for many nations and private companies. The dream of exploring Mars, of establishing a human presence on other planets, is no longer just the stuff of science fiction. It is the next great leap in human ambition. And just like during the space race, the stars are calling once again. In the vast, sun-baked expanse of Egypt, where the golden sands stretch endlessly beneath a blazing sky, there lies a mystery, a lost wonder of the ancient world. A place so incredible that, according to the great historian Herodotus, it was more magnificent than even the great pyramids of Giza. It was called the Labyrinth, an enormous underground complex, unlike anything ever seen before, stretching far beneath the earth and the monuments of Egypt. The Egyptians themselves described it as a marvel of both architecture and ingenuity, a labyrinthine structure so intricate it defied the imagination. Herodotus, the Greek historian who travelled extensively in the 5th century BC, was one of the first to write about this astonishing sight. In his travels he was brought to Egypt, where he had the opportunity to see the labyrinth firsthand. What he witnessed left him in awe. According to his writings, the structure was composed of vast chambers, intricately designed corridors, and towering walls, far surpassing the grandeur of any known structure at the time. It wasn't just a building, it was a labyrinth of monumental proportions, filled with secrets and hidden spaces. The labyrinth, Herodotus described, consisted of 12 immense courtyards surrounded by high stone walls. Inside, the chambers were filled with carvings, statues, and inscriptions, depicting the gods and the kings who had ruled Egypt throughout the ages. And perhaps most intriguing of all, Herodotus wrote of the structure's sheer size. Not just a few rooms or passageways, but a sprawling complex stretching over vast areas. Herodotus claimed the labyrinth was so large and complex that it was impossible to explore it fully. He even compared it to the pyramids themselves, noting that it was more wondrous and impressive. But like so many ancient marvels, the labyrinth soon faded from view, hidden beneath the sands of Egypt. Over time, the labyrinth became a legend. Despite its immense significance, it disappeared from history, buried beneath the shifting desert sands, as though the land itself had swallowed it whole. Today, scholars and archaeologists continue to search for the lost labyrinth, hoping to uncover its secrets and unlock the mysteries that have remained hidden for centuries. The labyrinth that Herodotus described was not just a building, it was a masterpiece of design, one so intricate that it seemed to stretch the very limits of human ingenuity. According to his account, the structure was more than just a collection of rooms or passageways. It was a vast, sprawling complex, its scale and complexity a testament to the ancient Egyptians' mastery of architecture and engineering. Herodotus famously noted that the labyrinth consisted of 12 courtyards, each one separated by towering stone walls that encased the labyrinth like a series of fortress-like enclosures. These walls were adorned with intricate carvings and scenes depicting the gods, the kings, and the mythological creatures that populated Egyptian beliefs. Some of these depictions were said to be so detailed they appeared almost lifelike, a breathtaking blend of art and architecture. What made the labyrinth so unique was its sheer scale. Herodotus described the labyrinth as having a vast network of interconnected chambers, some so large they could house entire villages within their walls. He went on to compare it to the pyramids in terms of magnificence, though unlike the pyramids, which had a singular focus, the labyrinth seemed to hold endless secrets, each turn, each passageway, leading to another mystery. Herodotus also noted the astonishing number of statues within the labyrinth. These statues were not just simple representations, they were said to be works of immense artistic skill. Some of these statues were crafted to resemble the gods of Egypt, while others were of the pharaohs themselves, immortalized in stone. One particularly striking description involved a colossal statue of the god Osiris, which towered over the labyrinth's central chamber, serving as a constant reminder of the divine presence that pervaded the entire complex. Perhaps the most fascinating aspect of Herodotus's account was his description of the labyrinth's layout. The rooms and passageways were not just haphazardly arranged. They were designed to confuse, to create a sense of mystery, a true labyrinth in every sense of the word. Herodotus said it was impossible to explore the entire structure in a single visit. It was too vast, too intricate. He ended his description with an air of awe, noting that the labyrinth was a permanent wonder, one that would stand for millennia, or so it seemed at the time. But despite the grandeur of Herodotus's account, the labyrinth was lost to history, hidden beneath the sands of Egypt, a mystery waiting to be rediscovered. The legend of the lost labyrinth has haunted historians, archaeologists, and treasure hunters for centuries. Despite Herodotus's vivid description of the magnificent underground complex, the labyrinth's exact location remains a mystery. Scholars have long debated where it might be hidden beneath the Egyptian sands, and whether it still lies intact beneath the layers of time and shifting dunes. Most agree that the labyrinth was most likely situated near Lake Moeris, an ancient, artificial lake in the Egyptian desert, near the Fayum oasis, about 60 miles south of Cairo. Herodotus himself had mentioned this location as the site of the labyrinth, linking it to the impressive structure built by the pharaoh Amenemhat II during the 12th dynasty, around 1800 BCE. The Fayum oasis, with its fertile lands and proximity to the Nile, had long been a thriving area of Egypt, and many believe that the labyrinth was part of a larger temple complex. This complex might have been dedicated to the god crocodile, Sobek, whose ancient cult was centered around the area. Some theories even suggest that the labyrinth was built as a temple to Sobek, perhaps to honor his association with the Nile and its cycles. Over the years, various attempts to locate the labyrinth have been made, but the shifting desert sands have provided little in the way of concrete evidence. In the 19th century, British archaeologists and explorers led expeditions into the Fayum region, but they came back with only fragmented remnants and unclear artifacts. They found some curious ruins, large rectangular stone structures, which some believed might have been part of the labyrinth's walls. But these findings were inconclusive, and no one has yet identified a definitive structure connected to the labyrinth itself. In modern times, technologies such as satellite imagery, ground-penetrating radar, and drones have provided new hope for discovering the labyrinth. The desert is still vast, and the sand continues to shift and bury anything that might lie beneath. In recent years, some researchers believe they may be closing in on the labyrinth's location, suggesting that the complex could be buried beneath what appears to be a series of vast, unexplored ruins near the Fayum. Still, the labyrinth's exact location remains elusive, and the possibility of it still being hidden beneath the sand is both tantalizing and frustrating. As with many great mysteries of the ancient world, the lost labyrinth calls out to those who dare to uncover its secrets. The question is not only where it lies, but what treasures, or even secrets, it might still hold within its walls. The lost labyrinth of Egypt was not just a monumental structure. It was part of a much larger, symbolic and spiritual landscape. To understand the significance of the labyrinth, one must consider its relationship to Egypt's other great wonders, particularly the pyramids, which have long been considered the pinnacle of ancient Egyptian architectural achievement. The Great Pyramid of Giza, built for the pharaoh Khufu, stands as a testament to Egypt's power and the complexity of their religious and architectural systems. It is no surprise that Herodotus, when describing the labyrinth, would compare it to the pyramids, considering them both products of the same cultural and spiritual world. While the pyramids are often associated with the burial of kings and the afterlife, the labyrinth may have had a different function, yet equally steeped in symbolism. Some theories suggest that the labyrinth was built as a temple complex, dedicated not to one specific god, but to the broader cosmic forces of Egypt, incorporating the various gods and mythologies that governed the cycles of life, death, and rebirth. Like the pyramids, the labyrinth's design could have been tied to Egyptian cosmology. Ancient Egyptians believed in a complex layered universe, one that blended the material and spiritual realms. The labyrinth, with its vast corridors and hidden chambers, could have symbolized the journey of the soul through the afterlife, much like the pyramids, which were designed as tombs to facilitate the pharaoh's passage into the next life. The comparison between the pyramids and the labyrinth suggests that both were not simply monumental feats of engineering, but symbolic representations of life's great mysteries. Some scholars even propose that the labyrinth might have served a ritualistic function, where initiates would go through a series of trials and spiritual experiences within its corridors, reflecting the journey of the soul through the underworld, a passageway to divine enlightenment, much like the spiritual journey that was symbolized by the pyramids. Moreover, Herodotus himself believed that the labyrinth had an intricate network of passages and chambers, similar in their complexity to the passages inside the pyramids. This idea suggests a deep architectural connection, a shared symbolic purpose to guide both the living and the dead through spaces that blurred the boundaries between the material world and the afterlife. Though the exact connection between the labyrinth and the pyramids remains unclear, one thing is certain. Both structures embodied the grand vision of ancient Egypt, a civilization that looked beyond the physical world, toward the mysteries of the cosmos and the eternal. The lost labyrinth of Egypt was not simply a structure built for practical purposes, like a palace or a marketplace. Its existence was shrouded in mystery, and the very design of the labyrinth suggests it was a place of profound spiritual and symbolic significance. The complex network of corridors and chambers